The Lady or the Tiger, and Other Logic Puzzles by Raymond Smullyan. We will be doing two logic puzzles from Chapter 4, where Inspector Craig visits Transylvania. But first, a word about Raymond Smullyan. This is Raymond Smullyan. He died about 3 years ago, aged 97. Any picture you will ever see of him, he is always smiling. He was a very, very happy man. Raymond Smullyan, an American mathematician, a magician, a concert pianist, and a logician, Taoist, and a philosopher. Notice that his first career was stage magic. It's only later that he decided to turn his attention to mathematics and logic, and eventually got his PhD. He is especially well known for his logic puzzles. Here he is with someone from the Davidson Institute of Science Education discussing logic puzzles. I ran across his book years and years ago, way back in the 1980s, and I might have seen him on Johnny Carson almost 40 years ago. Johnny Carson had a very big interest in logic. Notice the book he's holding. That book is exactly that book. And he's interviewing Raymond Smullyan on his show. There is the man himself. It's a great video, and it's worth having a look. He does a little bit of magic, and then he gives him a few puzzles and makes Johnny Carson work really very hard. It's a delightful video to watch. Okay, here we go. Inspector Craig visits Transylvania. So Craig returned to London when he suddenly received a wire from Transylvanian government urgently requesting him to come to Transylvania to solve some baffling cases of vampirism. Now, Transylvanians is inhabited by both vampires and humans. The vampires always lie, and the humans always tell the truth. Half the inhabitants, both humans and vampire, are insane and totally deluded in their beliefs. All true propositions they believe false, and all false propositions they believe true. The other half of the inhabitants are completely sane and totally accurate in their judgments. All true statements they know to be true, and all false statements they know to be false. Where is Transylvania, by the way? Transylvania, right there. It's in the middle, nestled among the mountains. The red dot over there is where I live in France, way back over here. So, and Transylvania is right there, here. I've highlighted Bucharest. Why? In 2008, Raymond Smullyan was invited to speak to logicians and mathematicians at a university there at Bucharest. He was about 90 years old and was his usual very jolly self. So, sane human and insane vampires both make only true statements. Insane humans and sane vampires make only false statements. An insane vampire responds the same way to any question as a sane human, and an insane human the same way as a sane vampire. It's a very confusing situation. Okay, so let's first model what the rules look like for Transylvanian logic. An inhabitant there is either sane or insane, and either a human or a vampire. If we connect the two, then the result is that an inhabitant can be only one of four things: a sane human, a sane vampire, or an insane human, or an insane vampire. If we knew that an inhabitant was sane, then we would know at least that he's either a sane human or a sane vampire. Now, for the sake of concreteness, let's give some examples. You could ask the inhabitant some questions and see how they answer. So you could ask, for example, is 2 and 2 4? And depending on if they say yes or no, you can make some conclusion. The first thing we need to do is keep in mind and fill in the truth table. Now, 2 plus 2 is indeed equal to 4, and so a sane human is going to say yes. A sane vampire is going to say, sane vampire also knows that 2 and 2 is 4, but is going to lie. An insane human is also going to say no, but that's because they're delusional. They think that 2 and 2 is 5, and so they're going to say no, 2 and 2 is not 4. But an insane vampire is both delusional and dishonest and thinks that 2 and 2 is not 4, but then is going to lie and wind up saying, oh yes, 2 and 2 is indeed 4. So that means that if you ask an inhabitant and he says, oh yes, 2 and 2 is 4, well then you can at least conclude that the inhabitant is either a sane human or an insane vampire. If on the other hand he says, well, then you can conclude that he's either a sane vampire, an insane human. Let's give another example. Suppose you ask, well, is 2 and 2 equal to 5? We fill in the truth table, and there, right, we know, of course, that 2 equals 5 is false. So a sane human is, of course, going to say no. A sane vampire is going to say, oh, yes. An insane human is also going to say, oh, yes. But an insane vampire is going to agree with the sane human and say, oh, no. Now, if the response is yes, notice that this is automatically updated, because if he says yes to this, then he would say no to that. If on the other hand he says no to 2 and 2 equals 5, well, then he would say yes to 2 and 2 equals 4. Consider a different question. Suppose you ask, hey, are you sane? First, we need to fill in the truth table. And a sane human is, of course, going to say, oh, yes, I am sane. A sane vampire is going to say, oh, no, he's going to lie. Even though he is sane, he's going to, oh, no, I'm not sane. An insane human is going to say, oh, yes, he's delusional. And an insane vampire is both delusional and dishonest, is going to say, oh, no, I am not sane, which, of course, is going to be the truth. Notice, if the answer is to that question, yes, then we can conclude that it's either a sane human or an insane human. What did I say? No, it's a sane human or an insane human, which means either way, it is a human. If the answer is no, says, oh no, I'm not sane, then we can conclude at least that the person speaking is definitely a vampire. Let's consider a different question. Suppose we ask, well, are you human? Well, as usual, first we fill in the truth table. And of course, a sane human is going to say, yes, I am human. A sane vampire is going to lie and say, yes. An insane human is going to also lie and say no. But an insane vampire is going to wind up telling the truth and say no. So, right, if the answer is yes, says yes, then we know at least that that person is sane, either a sane human or a sane vampire. And if he says no, well then he's either an insane human or an insane vampire. So let's consider a third example, but this is a little more subtle and a little trickier because here we're thinking about just a generic proposition of any kind. And any statement we will say is either true or false. And the rules for Transylvanian logic simply states this, that a sane human will make a true proposition or true statement. A sane vampire will always make a false one. An insane human will always make a false one. But an insane vampire will always make a true one. That means, right, if he makes a statement which we know to be true, then we can at least eliminate that the person is either a sane vampire or an insane human. If, on the other hand, he makes a statement that we know to be false, then we can conclude at least that the person is either a sane vampire or an insane human. Now, to the first 5 cases, we will actually do only 2 cases. So each of these cases involved 2 inhabitants. The important point is this. In each case, it's already known that one of them is a vampire and the other is human. It's just not known which. And that is what Inspector Craig has to figure out, is the vampire. The first case involved 2 sisters named Lucy and Mina, and Craig has to determine which one of them was a vampire. Now, nothing is known about the sanity, and here's the transcript of the investigation. Craig to Lucy, tell me something about yourselves. And Lucy says, we are both insane. And Craig says, is that true? And Mina says, of course not. Craig was able to prove which of the sisters was the vampire. And we will figure out how he figured it out. By the way, who's Lucy? This is Lucy. And we all know who that guy is. So the puzzle is really not that difficult once you see it. But the challenge is to model this puzzle as if you were teaching it to a robot. This is my task. The case of Lucy and Mina. We know those 2 things about Lucy. She's either sane or insane, and a human or a vampire. And the same for Mina. She's either sane or insane, and a human or a vampire. And we know that each makes a statement. Lucy says, we are both insane, and Mina says, of course not. Notice that Mina contradicts what Lucy says. We need to connect all of these to reflect what we know. The very first thing are these two things, right? There's a connection between them. And we know the following. We know that if Lucy is a human, then Mina is a vampire. Or if Lucy is a vampire, then Mina is a human. We know this because it's stipulated in the beginning that the inspector knows that they're not both human and not both vampire. It's one or the other in each case. If we discover that Lucy is human, then we will know that Mina is a vampire. If on the other hand, we discover that Mina is a human, well then we will be able to conclude that Lucy is a vampire. Okay, now we need to connect these other nodes. So Lucy says, we are both insane. Let's see what the truth table must look like for this. So as we know, right, we don't know if it's true or false, but we do know that in this world can only make a true statement, and that a sane vampire can only make a false, and an insane human can only make a false statement, and an insane vampire can only make a true statement. So we will stipulate in the truth table those deterministic functions. Now we need to connect those three nodes. Now we know that if Lucy is sane, Mina is sane, or if Lucy is insane, then Mina is insane. Why is this? Well, remember that for any propositions, right, a sane human and an insane vampire both will say the truth. And a sane vampire and an insane human will say what is false. That means that a sane human and a sane vampire and an insane human and an insane vampire disagree. Well, Mina, in fact, contradicts Lucy. So their statement cannot both be true and cannot both be false. If one is true, one is false. And if one is false, the other one is true. But that means then that Lucy and Mina are either both sane or both. Finally, we need to say something about the connection between Mina and Lucy and what Mina says. Now, we don't know if what Mina says is true or false, but we do know that if Mina is sane and Lucy is sane, well then what Mina says when she says, of course not, she says, oh, of course we're not both insane. Well then that statement would be true. If Mina is sane and Lucy is insane, well then that statement again, of course we're not both insane, would be true. Same thing if Mina was insane and Lucy. But if Mina is insane and Lucy is insane, well then the statement, of course not, we're not both insane, would be false. So that fills out the truth table for them. Now we are ready. Will this work? Okay, so let's see. To summarize, right, we've got the truth table here, and for this connection, and for this connection, and for this connection. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to enter what we know. Lucy says we are both insane. That's either true or false. Now we don't know. So let's say, well, I suppose that is true. Okay, nothing happens. One thing we do know is that if that's true, then what Mina said, since it contradicts what Lucy says, must be false. And there we go. Everything gets updated, and we find out that Lucy must be the vampire. Very well. Let's retract that. Now, if what Lucy says is false, okay, we enter false. And of course, then what Mina says must be true. And once again, everything gets updated, and we find out that Lucy must be the vampire. So in either case, Lucy is the vampire. This works very well. That's excellent. That's excellent. The next case was that of the Lugosi brothers. Both had the first name of Bella. Again, one was a vampire and one was not. They made the following statements. Bella the elder says, I am human. And Bella the younger says, I am human. Bella the elder then said, my brother is sane. Which one is the vampire? By the way, remember this picture? That was Lucy. Well, that there is Bella Lugosi. Okay, so here is the model. So we've got Bella the elder and Bella the younger. And we know there's a connection between them, and we can fill out the truth table in the following way. Oh, and we also, this will connect them to the rest of what they say. So the connection is as follows. We know that they're not both human and not both vampires. So we can specify in the truth table, if Bella is a sane human, well then it's impossible for the younger to be sane, so we just put 0, and impossible to be an insane human. We can leave sane vampire and insane vampire blank because we don't care. We just need to specify what is impossible. Certainly, if Bella the Elder is a sane vampire, then we need to say that a sane vampire is impossible for Bella the Younger, and over here, insane vampire, also impossible. So that's all we need to do. We specify what we know is impossible, namely that they are either both human or both vampires. Now, we need to specify the relationship between Bella the Younger and when he says, I am human. We know that a sane human can say, yes, I am human. And a sane vampire can also say, yes, I am human, even though, of course, he's lying. And an insane human, however, would say, no, would not say, I am human. And an insane vampire also would not say, I am human. And the exact same thing for Bella. Okay. And finally, we need to say something about the claim, my brother is sane. That statement is either true or false. We don't know which, but what we do know is that a sane human can only make a true statement, and a sane vampire only false, and an insane human only a false statement, and an insane vampire only a true statement. Now, will this work? So the very first thing we need to say is, okay, well, we've asked Bella, hey, are you human? He says, oh yes, I am human. And Bella the Younger says, yes, I am human. So we've eliminated some possibilities. And now, my brother is sane. Is that true or false? Well, it has to be true, because we find that when Bella says, I am human, well then, he must in fact be sane. So my brother is sane must be true. So we can safely enter true. And we find out that it is Bella the Younger who is a sane vampire. So this works. Let us give the last word to the man himself.
Excellent, Mr. Enfield. Excellent.